And we've been gathering people who have information. So some of our speakers here are people who have information and they're working in different parts of the country as well as locally. But today I've invited Karen Ball to come speak with us. And Karen's from Texas, but she's before that, she was from another state and then another state, and she's done all kinds of stuff. Bottom line, she's got a criminal justice background with a humanitarian heart and a big, big mind full of experience on how to do alternatives. So I don't know, Karen, if you brought anyone else to speak today, but please tell us what you think would be helpful for us to know about from your experiences. Welcome, Karen.
Well, thank you, Joy. I am representing what's known as Grassroots Compassionate San Antonio. And it's basically anyone in San Antonio that's interested in figuring out how we can practice and live into the ethic of reciprocity. And so I shared in chat 3 websites that I'm going to be taking you to in my conversation, but I wanted to put them in chat so that if for some reason when I screen share, if it's not large enough for you to see, you can kind of go to these places on your own. And then you also have the website. So after this, if you want to touch base with any of these websites, I think they're just chocked full of resources that would be useful to Bellingham or any other community. So before I get too far into the conversation, I just want to kind of set the context for what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to be talking about compassionate cities and my experience here in San Antonio with Compassionate San Antonio. So let me give some background to the place, San Antonio, and then I'm going to zoom out to the Charter of Compassion and talk to you a little bit about how the Compassionate Cities came about. And then I'm going to zoom in to San Antonio. And feel free to, raise your hand, interrupt me if you need clarity on anything. This is a dialogue. All right, so let me begin by contextually saying that I reside in the city of San Antonio, and I want to recognize the interconnected nature that exists in the universe, and that I also want to express gratitude to the Payaya people, who were the indigenous stewards of this area of Turtle Island, which is now known as San Antonio, Texas. Also in that acknowledgement, I want to lament that colonizing powers, and there were more than one down in this area, malformed by a belief in manifest destiny, institutionalized systems of genocide and slavery on this land that I now speak to you from. So I think it's important for us to have that context. And I'm also going to, throughout the course of this conversation, give you some other, or give you statistics that also give you a context for the city in which I reside. But first, let me start out with the Charter for Compassion. So I am going to share my screen. And what I'm going to show you on the website for the Charter for Compassion is what's actually called the Charter. Okay, it says read, affirm, and share the charter. And I will play this in a minute. It's a 2-minute clip. But in 2008, Karen Armstrong, a theologian, did a TED Talk. And what she did was she was speaking to this TED community and saying that we need to call all of our faith communities and our religious communities back to the ethic of the golden rule, because that's the central thread running through all the world's religions. And somewhere along the line, we've got so caught up in our dogmas for our religions and our faith traditions that we've kind of lost touch with that thread. And so she compiled a number of leaders from various faith traditions, and they came up with this charter, which this video is now going to read for you. Hold on a second. It would help if I don't have it on.
The heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions.
Calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
With absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life.
To refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain.
To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest.
To impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody.
And to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies.
Is a denial of our common humanity.
We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately.
And that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women
to restore compassion
to the center of morality and religion.
To return to the ancient principle
that any interpretation of scripture
that breeds violence,
hatred,
or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information
about other traditions, religions, and cultures.
To encourage a positive appreciation
of cultural
and religious diversity.
To cultivate
an informed empathy
with the suffering of all human beings,
even those
regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world.
Rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness.
Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries.
Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential for human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity.
It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable in the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.
Okay, and also on this page, and I just noticed that my bar here is kind of blocking off their header. So you can see, you can find out a whole bunch of information about the Charter for Compassion. This gives in the communities, you can see an overview of different communities. Right now, there are 450 compassionate cities. This is worldwide. So this is an international website. The Charter for Compassion, kind of to facilitate dialogue, makes a distinction between a number of sectors. And so like the arts sector, the business sector, the education, environment, and so on. It does recognize that there's a lot of overlap between these, like peace and restorative justice, huge overlap. But in order to try and start the conversations, they felt that it was good to kind of delineate these major headings. And then there's programs that the International Charter for Compassion does. I'm going to come back to these when I zoom into San Antonio, because there's one I want to highlight. And I also know that later in the week, you guys are going to be talking about housing. And so if you go to the blog here, it's in the Charter for Compassion, and I can't tell if it's doing this little thing or not. They have a whole section that talks about housing as a human right. So before we leave this page, I just want to go down here. This is the text of what they just said. I want to go down and show you that you can affirm the charter. So basically, you can click on that and say, yes, I want to uphold this charter. I want to live
I think what you're saying is
by the
that you
ethic
can
of
uphold the
rest. I'll
charter.
stop and sharing now because I want to take a moment to reflect on that. I mean, I've know that the first time that I heard about the Charter of Compassion, and this was back in 2011 when I first got exposed to it, I was just blown away by how it was crafted by all these faith leaders. And so I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts having listened to what they came up with as a charter? And do you see how this might be a useful resource in creating communities of resilience, creating communities that can kind of self-govern by this ethic? I see Castro's, so Castro, would you like to unmute and share your comments?
I've already shared this with my partner Tobiah, because we need to link arms with this charter, with the Charter for Compassion. And one thing that you mentioned was housing as a human right. And I'm about to shed a tear because it's so valuable and it's so synchronistic and harmonious with the purpose of the project that we've been developing in the back office, not sharing with nobody too much at all, you know what I mean, on the blockchain, and a decentralized form of value generation and with the people, away from the system, you know what I mean, and it's establishing our own land, tethering it to an actual land. All the metaverse hype and NFTs and all that, actual charters, and dealing with the African Union, you know what I mean. There's actually a place, I'm sure you're aware, for the diaspora in the 6th region of the African Union. Mm-hmm. That's what we're developing. You know what I mean? And this vision is harmonious with it. It's a place for, we all have a piece of that in us. The people that have been disenfranchised from their cultural traditions, you know what I mean? The ones that matter, that are harmonious with life, with general life, in respect of, just everybody's tribe. Everybody has a tribe, and working together as a community, linking arms with like minds, that's your tribe, your soul tribe, and it's the time right now. We have the opportunity to make this manifest at thought speed, using the proper mechanical interfaces, you know what I mean, with all the technology that God has allowed us to use and create. It's still not there yet, because there's more technology. Our technology, this is the highest form of technology on this earth, and they trying to recreate that in the lab, but we are losing focus of living in thriving wellness within, so the first part is we got to go within, and we're talking about creating a society and a place, where fruit is the trees that you see growing, not necessarily just palm trees without coconuts, you know what I mean? Everywhere. That's the protocol that we have to build by, you know what I mean? In that land building in. And yeah, we have a timeline, and the timeline is already, you know what I mean, we already agreed upon it, but it's malleable still too, because everything is the vision of inspiration, you know what I mean, based off meditation and prayer and a long, hard peaks and valleys, you know what I mean, trial in life physically, you know what I mean. I'm 36, about to be 37 soon. And my brother, who I'm working with, is 33, and there's numbers, everything is numbers and everything is synchronistic. There's so much value in just that, where we are in life, and all of us together. I'm sure we can, all I gotta do is just talk with each other, you know what I mean? And the God in me respects the God in every one of you, you know what I'm saying? And boom, then we start putting the pieces of the puzzle together to form the image of God on this earth, right? And then there's no limit from thought to thing. Things can manifest. We were gods before we lost consciousness. Now it's harmony. It's harmony we gotta express. And so we have these protocols, and I'm kind of floating now. You know what I mean? That was my kind of intro to where I'm at right now. In the end, I've experienced the quantum wellness application of the, designed by Dr. Cook, and I was, man, and so I dove into that with experience, you know, as an alchemist for my own health and wellness. I had to come back from traumatic brain injury in 2009. And so this whole long journey, everything, now I have all these jewels because it's clicked. Now I eat to live. Now I don't eat death. You know what I'm saying? My choice is fruit, fruit, melons, berries, some herbs if I need them, you know what I mean? And you know, eat your water. You know, these are chants that are true, you know, and there's coming through other enlightened ones like brother Yaki Hickman. And if you get a chance, anyone get a chance, go look at yakiawaken.com. That's like that saved my life. You know, my lifestyle. I'm changing my routines and I'm looking forward to different things now. You know what I mean? And it's easy to replace the things once we meditate. And we're all ready. We're here in this meeting right here. We're all ready for this type of lifestyle. And the place that we have designed and are just continuing to design and open, like, we need the public, you know, the people with the project that we're gonna introduce is like the designers too. We're all designers. We all have a gift, and that's what it's about. It's about working with your fellow people, you know, in a decentralized fashion, you know, straight up, and then just building what we all agree upon, because collective agreement is why we wake up and experience the same things every day, because this is really a hologram.
So Castro, in a few minutes, I'm having problems with my video. Karen, if you can continue your presentation as if I wasn't really supposedly hosting this, I'm having problems with audio and video. So make sure that everything is going well and finish your presentation. And then the goal is to open it up to get all kinds of links and ideas and other resources added to the chat as we proceed. Okay.
Okay.
So thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing, Castro. And I hope that Mel and Frank and Faith will feel open to sharing as we continue. So I introduced you to the overall international Charter for Compassion. Now I kind of want to zoom us into San Antonio and give you a little bit of the history of San Antonio and how we came to be acknowledged as a compassionate city. Joy has already indicated that I was not born here in Texas. I started out in Pennsylvania and hit a couple other states on my way down here. And it was not a choice that I would have said, yes, I want to go live in the South. It just kind of worked that way that brought me down here. But I want to speak again to context of San Antonio. When I first got down here 22 years ago, my first introduction to San Antonio was listening to a radio station saying, "This is Military City, USA." And for me, that was an exclusive story, because my grandfather, who served in World War II, came back and became an alcoholic. And so for me, it was not an identity that I wanted to be associated with. So how could I find my spot? Remember, Castro was talking about pieces of a puzzle, so to speak. How could I contribute my specific gifts, but to a larger story of San Antonio that could include my vision, as well as a vision of this as Military City, USA. And so we started, myself and some other individuals, there were maybe a handful of us, I would say 10 to 12 people, started conversations in faith organizations about the Charter for Compassion and creating from the bottom up an interest in San Antonio being declared a compassionate city, because there are some things that already in San Antonio that are wonderful examples of compassion. We have a philanthropic person, Gordon Hartman, who created a amusement park for individuals that have some type of different ability than the norm. And so this was a place that those that sometimes are left out could find a way to come and participate in amusement parks. The Spurs are here. The Spurs do a lot of philanthropic work. So it wasn't that we were creating a compassionate city from nothing. We were acknowledging that there was already some compassion that was happening here, and we just wanted to center that, just like they said in the Charter for Compassion, of returning the ethic of reciprocity to the center of our decision-making platforms. So what I'm going to do right now is I want to share with you our charter. And this is what I'm not quite sure whether it will be large enough that you will be able to read it or not. So if it's not, you can find this at sacompassion.net. So here's the Compassionate San Antonio resolution. So I'm just going to, it's not very long, so I am going to read through this. So whereas compassion is a purpose, principle, and unifying value that guides and compels people of all backgrounds, perspectives, creeds, and cultures to treat all human beings with justice, equity, and respect. And whereas research demonstrates that practicing compassion produces positive benefits in all sectors of civic and community life, including safety, public health, and physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And whereas the International Campaign of Compassionate Cities is a global movement inspired by the Golden Rule, or the ethic of reciprocity, which calls on each person to treat others as he or she wishes to be treated. And whereas residents of the city of San Antonio demonstrate this ethic daily in their homes, places of faith, business, community organizations, and on our streets. Whereas San Antonio continues to exemplify compassionate values in many forms, from its 5-time NBA championship team, the Spurs, who play, mentor, and lead with compassion, to the hosting of the largest Martin Luther King Jr. March in the country, and its welcoming support of 335,000 evacuees who sought refuge after Hurricane Katrina, that show a living example of compassion to the world. Whereas San Antonio continues to strive to advance the quality of life for all their residents and in all their communities without partisanship, and with the conviction that people can and do have the capacity to improve their lives and make a positive difference in the lives of others. And whereas San Antonio was founded in faith almost 300 years ago by our foremothers and fathers, and this city continues that tradition today through its faith-based initiative by exploring and actualizing collaboration across faith and civic lines to promote the greater good. And I'm going to speak to that part directly later on. And whereas many expressions of compassion take place in our city on a daily basis, facilitated by dedicated community organizations working to lift up our neighbors by ensuring equality and promoting the human potential of the community. And whereas The Charter for Compassion is active in nearly 50 countries with initiatives in hundreds of cities and communities, both large and small, including Austin, Dallas, Houston, and our sister city of Monterrey, Mexico. Each with their own unique way of expressing compassion and exploring the use of compassion as their overall strategic lens within the complex urban growth and conflicted times. And then we have 7 different sections that kind of give the specifics in how we are going to live into that more compassionate future. And so, like I said, we started this movement in the fall of 2011, and you can see that this was passed on the 22nd of June, 2017, which happened to have been my 50th birthday. So it was a great 50th birthday. So in where I want to spend the rest of my time talking about what is happening in San Antonio is kind of pulling out this one whereas, where it talks about through the faith-based initiative. So San Antonio is unique in that a position was created within the city under the umbrella of human services that is called the faith-based liaison. And the role of that office, so to speak, is to connect all the parts of the community in this work of the Golden Rule. So while the person is hired by the city and works for the city, they are exchanging information from the city to the faith leaders, to nonprofit organizations, and back. And so we're constantly informing one another of what the other is doing and partnering when we can to respond to the needs of San Antonio. So to set one more container for what San Antonio is struggling with in the present moment, let me just say that San Antonio, out of all Texas cities, is the most economically segregated, okay? So that means that we have pockets of huge wealth, but pockets of severe poverty too. And so this is not something we want to continue. We also have one of the worst rates in the state of Texas and the nation for domestic violence. 1 in 3 women will be exposed to some form of domestic violence in their lifetime. So think about numbers of kids, of what that would mean. Usually it's 1/2 of kids in San Antonio somehow are touched by domestic violence. And then another number that, I'm not real excited about, but, it's important for us to understand these realities, is that 1 in 5 suffer some type of mental health challenge in San Antonio. So a number of things that have originated as a response to that is we have a group meeting of civic leaders and community leaders and nonprofits every Thursday morning, and the group is called At the Intersection. We're looking at the intersection of faith, civic leaders, nonprofits, profits, and finding out where is there overlap? Where can we do some partnering to live into this ethic of reciprocity. And so each week there will be someone invited to give like a little briefing, it's called, and the briefing is usually about 15 minutes long, about what their area of specialty is. So when the pandemic started, and that's when we started hosting these at the intersection conversations, one of the things that people in the community really wanted to know was, what's the information in terms of the spread of COVID? And once shots came online, where can we get those? And so we would have regular briefings at the intersection that would say, you know, this is who's eligible for the vaccine right now. This is where you can get it. San Antonio is comprised of 8 different council districts. And so the goal, once we found a vaccine, was to find a place within every city council district. And in some of those, it was churches that hosted pop-up clinics where people could go and get vaccinated. Currently, we're working with these 8 city council districts to also build resiliency centers. So back in 2021, you might have heard that most of Texas was in the dark in February, from like February 17th to the 20th, I believe it was, because everything was frozen. So our electricity system in Texas is independent from the grid that's in the west and the grid that's in the east. And so when we went into the dark, we couldn't rely on connecting to any of the other grids. Part of the reason we went dark is because we are dependent on water to move the energy, create the electricity that then could be produced and transferred to our electric companies. And when the pipes froze, we had a problem then with even getting the energy transferred because we couldn't even get the energy produced. So what we did with the resiliency centers is we had warming stations where anybody I live in District 8, if I lost power, I knew that there was some place that I could go where there would be food there for me. There would be a place where I could be warm. And there would also be a place that I could find out what information I needed for other resources. We set up lines for people to get clean water, because again, we had an issue where you couldn't flush your toilet in some places, or there was a burn, boil water notices. And so we would send out action alerts, and how the action alerts work is it's a number that you text the word compassion to, and then you get into this system, so to speak, that will alert you to when there is an overwhelming need. So one of the first overwhelming needs that the system was used for was with masks. When we went into the pandemic, there was not a vaccine. And so a notice was sent out, we need people to make masks. And so that went out, and people were then told where to drop off those masks or anything. I'm going to pause right here because I feel like I've given you a lot, and I want to just honor a space for you to kind of absorb what I've given so far. And if you have any questions or anything, or you want some elaboration, and I see Joy is now back in view, I'll just take a pause here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have been listening the whole time, a little tiny bit scattered because we've been trying to get a good new video camera up, but I have been listening, and I really appreciate the detail that you're going into, because physically, that's one of the biggest problems we've had in Whatcom County with the just this last year when the COVID crisis came on. What I didn't realize is that everybody was shut down, like all the doors to all the facilities, all the doors to help people get food, to help people get into churches and you know, whatever facility it was, to the various services and the government services, all that stuff was shut down. And then the city went ahead and shut off most of the toilets were shut down. The water was shut down. Our outhouses, the city at one point did put outhouses out for the homeless people who were camped at Camp 210. But then at one point, when they decided that they were not liking the homeless that were there, because what happened is the homeless that were there actually became vulnerable to people who wanted to turn the homelessness into a political movement. So they got infiltrated and the other people got in. So we ended up with a political fight when what we had was an emergency crisis. So then when the government shut down all their doors, and then the police were overwhelmed with their issues, and other people, you know, it's like the homeless suddenly were living there and they had no food, they had no water, the outhouses were shut down, they closed down the outhouses. They didn't have water for sanitation, and yet legally, according to the Centers for Disease Controls, they weren't supposed to be around anybody within 5 feet. And yet, so it's like it put them not only in a catch-22, it's like it put them in a catch-22 times 10. And so the urgency got worse and worse and worse. And then when the county came in and the city came in and the state and the BPD, like there were 4 agencies that did like a raid on Camp 210. Was an assault. They said it was for public safety, but it actually turned out to be the opposite of that, because then these people were scattered all over the city. This was in 2021. They were scattered all over the city. So we had civic refugees, people living in the woods, unsheltered, unfed, in an emergency condition, without the safety and protection that was supposed to be there under an emergency declaration. That was the point. But in fact, it was the reverse. So the reason I'm telling you that is because that's a real world experience of understanding why you guys were able to figure out and started to figure out communication. Because if you don't have communication, you can't organize anything. And I see that we did have another person come on the call who might be able to speak to that. If you can, feel free. But I just want you to repeat really quick, Karen, what was the system that you used to be able to allow people to intersect and talk to each other and put notices out?
Okay, it's called an action alert. It's on actually, let me share my screen again. It's back in on this page on San Antonio Compassion Net.
Okay.
So, except I gotta move my toolbar here.
Yeah, and if somebody else wants to speak for a minute while she's organizing.
Yeah, sure. So here are the action alerts. And so this is how it works for us. We just text the word compassion to this number, and then that puts you into the system. And it's not like I'm getting a text every day. It's just for those extraordinary crisis moments that these texts will be set out.
And who does it go to again?
So it goes to, no, well, the city, but it goes to the faith-based initiative. And so you see Reverend Ann Helmke is the liaison for the faith-based initiative. And so because she's connected into the city structure, when the city identifies a crisis, she then can leverage her connection with nonprofits and the faith community by saying, hey, we have this massive need. that the city wants to step forward to and respond, but we need help.
So
That's
basically what you're saying is the faith-based community coordinated, built the bridge so that the communication could happen and it was instantaneous because it could be done through text.
Correct.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to this? Okay. Keep going, Karen. You're on a roll.
Okay. I guess the other thing that I would like to highlight, well, there's two other things I'd like to highlight. So as I pointed out, one of the challenges we had in any city at this point in time, having lived through COVID, is people are struggling with mental health. Okay. So what we did in these 8 city council districts is we identified congregations that wanted to participate in what is called Bridges to Care. And so Bridges to Care is making that bridge between a faith community to someone who is struggling with a mental health concern. And so we had NAMI, our National Mental Health Alliance, come and do a training for congregations that wanted to step forward and do this. And I went through, I was one of the individuals that went through this training. Now, I'm not trained as a mental health practitioner at all. Where I am trained is to recognize crisis symptoms and to know where I can refer people if I see something, but then also if in conversation in my congregations, someone is expressing a struggle, then I can accompany them in their receiving assistance for mental health services if they want to go that way, or just kind of being someone that walks beside them and accompanies them as they're trying to make sense of their world in, quite depressing and sometimes anxiety producing situations that we find ourselves in nowadays. So that was one thing. And then the other thing I want to tell you about is right after San Antonio became a compassionate city in 2017, we had this brainstorm of, okay, we want to get the language of compassion and training about compassion into our schools. And so we started thinking, okay, do we want this at the college level? Do we want this at the elementary level? How do we want to integrate this into our schools? And what we ultimately decided is we want to go grand. We want to hit all different levels. Okay, so we wanted to start primary, elementary, middle, high schools, and we wanted to hit the colleges. So what we did is we, looked around for programs that were teaching compassion. And we found one called Compassion Integrity Training. You can link to this particular training group through the Global Charter for Compassion. And in fact, let me just real quickly take you to that because let's see here. That would be under Charter Education Institute. So they run a number of educational type trainings. So I'm just going to go to previous courses so you can see a little bit about the course. And designate, so then compassion integrity. So compassionate integrity training is actually out of Atlanta. So anyways,
can you share your screen, Karen? Or
oh, I thought I was. I'm so sorry.
Or if somebody could, if people can, when she's talking and she's giving these references, if you can type the URLs or the leads into the chat, that would be very helpful also. And by the way,
thank you for telling me that, Joy. I'm sorry, I was going to the place and I thought it was sharing. So
one more advice. In the middle of the screen right now, you have this panel for sharing for Zoom. So move it up or down, but probably up.
How about that?
And then you also have that rectangle in the middle of the screen. If you
hold on a second. That is
this the picture for the Zoom?
No, it's why am I not? Oh, I can't get rid of it right now as long as I'm sharing. It's the transcription.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind then.
So, but I can show this up a little bit so you see where it says compassion integrity training.
Yeah.
And then here's a little description about the course. Because I wasn't sharing when I told you about this, to find any courses that the charter is doing, you go to programs, and then you go to the Charter Education Institute. It was arranged by years. I clicked on this year, and that's where I found this particular training, compassion integrity training.
Awesome. Thank you. It's really important if any of you guys are listening and if you've got your chat open and I'm not catching it or one of us moderators are not catching these links, anybody can type the links and the URLs and things like that into the chat, because the goal here is to collect all this knowledge. And if it's printed and written, other people pay attention. It's sort of a way of having a collective secretary taking notes as people are talking, and that helps us all.
Right. And that's why initially I put the charterforcompassion.org in the chat, is so that you at your own leisure can go to this website. So we decided that compassion integrity training was the training that we wanted to expose all our schools to. And this was, the intention was to unveil this in 2020. What happened in 2020, folks? Pandemic.
Yeah.
We were left with, what do? We went online, and we had 100% participation with the 5 universities and colleges that are in San Antonio, and 85% of the school districts participate. So there were 150 educators that were trained in 2020 in this compassion integrity training. It's a 10-week training, and it's broken into 3 different sections. Compassion for self is the first section, compassion for others is the second, and then compassion in systems is the final. And that's one of the main reasons we selected this one, is we were really attracted to that system work. So then once these 150 people went through this training, we created what was called the San Antonio Compassion Institute. And we decided that this was going to be a 2-part institute. So the first part of the institute is to get people trained in this compassionate integrity training. The second part of this institute is experimental conversations. And so we ran during the school year, so from like late August until May, 1-hour meetings once a month, and people were put into small cohorts of about 10 people, where they could say, this is how I'm applying what I learned in compassion and integrity training into the school where I am. And we got feedback and shared best practices, where we also had people saying, this is where I'm struggling because I might have a principal that doesn't get it, or, so what can we do We even had people that were using these skills in kindergarten in terms of teaching kids how to self-regulate their emotions. Because remember, the first part of this training was self-compassion. So that was in 2020. In 2021, we opened up the registration for all sectors. There was a huge number of people from the city of San Antonio that got trained. We had business leaders that we had got trained. We continued to have educators that had heard of the success from the previous year, and they came to be trained. And so our numbers were down a little bit the second year. I think our total was, I would say, right around 120 for 2021. And so now this is the third year that we've been running the Institute. We just had this is September, so we have had one experiential meeting, so to speak, and they're up for the rest before May.
And this is all done through online education?
Yes. Now, those of us that were trained in the compassion and integrity training prior to 2020, when we were devising it, all of that training was in person.
Right.
But it just so happened when we launched, it was during the pandemic. And
right.
We haven't gotten to the point where we're meeting in person yet. And so one of the people that was initially trained before we started the 2020 training was our mayor, Ron Nierenberg. So our mayor has been trained in this compassionate integrity training.
Awesome. So let me ask a question.
Sure.
I'm assuming, did you do the compassionate integrity training?
I have, yes. I did the training. I've also was responsible for facilitating one of the cohorts in 2020 and then last year in 2021. I'm
So
not doing it this year.
Let me be invitational.
Okay.
And you can say no and we'll find somebody else, or maybe you can find somebody else for us. The Restorative Community Coalition could certainly host something like that, because now we're learning how to do these things. If you might be willing to help us do that, we could put some of our people to work in the community, and other people will call in allies, coordinate it. We do have a strong interfaith coalition in Whatcom County. I have not been as connected to it, but I know that we have other nonprofits who are.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the tiny home community. We've got Bridges to Services. We've got, multiple. We actually have one of the largest per capita volunteer groups nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
We have an enormous volunteer group, but we could coordinate it and invite. That's one of the reasons we're doing these conversations, is to start bringing all of these different allies together. And as a coalition, we could help that happen.
Okay.
And then it would be awesome to have somebody help facilitate one of those meetings for people in our community. I think that would be incredibly helpful at this moment.
Okay.
Would you consider it?
I cannot, I'm not actually trained to do the compassion and integrity training.
Okay.
I can do the second part, like the experiential.
Okay.
But if you connect either through the charter or directly with, and I'm going to have to check, I believe I'm going to put it in the chat. And if somebody could just check with me and see if that's a hot link.
Okay.
But that should get you to the training. Okay.
Okay. That's great. We'll check and we'll follow up on that. We don't have to do the administration of it right now, but I just want you to know that the coalition is very aware, and I mean, we have to do this stuff. And if we're not, we're just, we have to do it. Somebody's got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like we're elected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Keep going.
Does anybody have any questions in terms of I don't know, maybe wonderings in terms of how we might, as a city, respond to a particular concern.
I have another question about that. And one of those is, as a city, would we have to have our city council apply to be a compassionate city and get involved in these things? Or is it, if we had X number of people sign up on a form, could we become involved, those kinds of things? Because whether we can get our sense that the only way to get these things done anymore right now, just because we're at such loggerheads in so many different places, is that it's almost like we need to do a survey and have people sign up on the survey. And if we get X number of signatures, then we could be considered like a group.
Right. We followed the model when we were looking to draft our resolution. We looked at Louisville, Kentucky, because their mayor at the time ran on a platform of compassion. And so we took a lot of language from him. We wanted the proclamation to come through the city. I mean, we wanted the city council to say and take ownership of this, but that's not where we started. We started in the community, built a desire for it, and then took it to city council and said, hey, will you guys sign on to this? And they signed on unanimously the first day that Mayor Ron Nirenberg took office. This was the first thing that they signed. There was absolutely no discussion on it. In fact, those of us that were sitting in the audience were kind of like, did they sign? We didn't even realize that it had passed because there was no debate or anything. Everybody was fully on board with this. There are some cities, and I don't know if Austin, Frank, maybe you know if Austin did this or not. Either Austin or it may have been Houston had like a proclamation drafted out and signed, but they had no connection to the community. And so it kind of fizzled, or I should say it's struggling because there is a disconnect between what the city council came up with and the community. So to answer your question, I would say you don't have to go through city government. I recommend it if you can get them on board.
Yeah, that's always the best idea. But in the meantime, if we got to go sideways, we'll go sideways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And I did want to let you know that a lot of the people in Bellingham, a lot of we had 1,500 volunteers at least that were working in the community at the time that the county did the what I'm calling is a police raid. The homeless called it a homeless sweep. The police called it a safety event or whatever they called it. But the bottom line of that particular event, in fact, did something like a huge traumatic shockwave that went throughout the community, because that event was televised. It was broadcast all over the world on social media. We had snipers on the ceiling. On roofs. We had military style equipment and trucks, and the whole city center was cordoned off. And it was an absolutely out of bounds, emotionally difficult situation for everybody. And all the volunteers were at risk. The people who were homeless were at risk, et cetera. So it really would be helpful for our community to find a way to galvanize that information together again without making it about it's either us or the city or us or the county. It's like we, the human beings here, want to create that. And maybe our coalition could, I'll think about that. Maybe our coalition could write up something like that and get everybody to sign off on it. And maybe we could be one of the coordinators, and maybe we could talk to the interfaith or the the Unitarian group here has been very supportive of the work that we've done, Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, and actually the Unitarian Fellowship out of Blaine was very helpful to us. So
yeah,
we'll work.
It's a real partnership here. I mean, the city does not, like the Compassion Institute, the city doesn't run it. It's volunteers connected to the training of CIT that are offering it. And then when we have the cohorts meet, again, it's not city people doing that, it's volunteers doing that.
Sure.
But with the action alerts, that's definitely tied into the city because they're the ones that first find out when there's a crisis in terms of migrants that are just going to be unloaded at our bus station or something. And so then they will make the call saying, hey, we need some help.
Well, that would be really helpful to the county and the city if we could facilitate that. Well, so we'll put that on our checklist of things to be done. That would be great. Are there other things that you wanted to bring forward on top of that? Because it seems there's
John,
you
can
also
turn off your video, your voice, we are losing you.
yeah, so can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, anything
Better.
I'm sorry.
Just agreeing it was better.
Yeah, if there's any other things that we can do, that would be really helpful if there's other things, because I know from a community organizing standpoint, you've been doing a lot with all the violence that's happened within a couple hours of your town. I mean, there's just been an enormous amount of stuff this year. What else are you finding that people are doing?
To speak directly to Uvalde, because we are only, 70 miles to, or Uvalde is 70 miles to the east of, west of us. I get my east and west mixed up somehow. There's tremendous trauma there. So we have the infrastructure here in our mental health cohorts. So a lot of that is being offered to folks in Uvalde to resource. And so we're getting them connected with mental health communities, whether that be, one-on-one mental health, or whether that just kind of being group processing. It's really up to the citizens of Uvalde in terms of what that looks like. And it varies from person to person. Here in San Antonio, we created a collaborative called the SANE Collaborative, meaning we want to have SANE as in S-A-N-E. We want to see some sane legislation and some other things as a result of this. But, when I say that, I'm not saying that we're taking a partisan position on gun control, okay? Because one of the individuals that's connected with our collaborative, the same collaborative, is actually a police officer. So we're certainly connecting to organizations that are trying to get information out about how we can reduce gun violence. So Moms Demand Action is one of those organizations that are not saying, hey, I want to take your guns, but they are saying, make sure your gun is locked in a place where a child cannot get to it. And they'll even, be handing out locks, okay? So we're connecting with them and we're providing that information. We've also provided information to parents and teachers now that kids are back in school in terms of how do we talk about violence, how do we have those conversations? particularly if it, you don't want to panic students, but you also want them not to shut down if a shooter came into their school. So, how can we provide them with enough information that if they hear something, that they'll report it? Okay, so we might be able to do some prevention, but also if in the throes of, a violent event, what steps could be taken at that point in time. So for example, my city council person contacted the schools in the area and invited any student that wanted to learn how to apply a tourniquet. They would teach them how to do that. So it's not a skill that I want to run out and say, hey, we're teaching people how to, tie tourniquets. But it's another tool in, our backpack in terms of responding.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I grew up, again, going back to history a while, but, I learned CPR when I was in middle school. And then I learned it again in high school. And then I learned it again in college. I mean, it was just part of my life because I grew up in the woods and I grew up in a culture where you never knew when you were going to be the first one on the scene. Right. So it's just smart to know first aid. And today, one of the things Debbie's going to be talking about it when she does her conversations on Thursday, we're actually going to be talking about some of the first aid things, or Friday, some of the emotional first aid, for example. There's new emotional first aid trainings that you can take. There's touch therapy that you can do. There's de-escalation therapy that's available. In the last 5 to 10 years, the amount of emotional resilience training and physical body work that can be done from the neurosciences. I mean, neurosciences has just grown dramatically on how to help people de-escalate their own emotional traumas and to work with people around it. So in the next couple of days, one of the things we're going to do is invite more of you, anybody on the call who has leads and tips. That's one of the things that will be typed up in the new 2022 report. It's going to be a community solutions report. It's just regenerative solutions from all over the world. So we're going to want leads, we're going to want comments, we're going to want testimonials, things to truly help people, because again, you don't have to have a certification to be compassionate.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You don't have to have titles and licenses. If you have to save somebody's life, you just go save their life. It does help. It's interesting. One of the people that I interviewed on the Humanity Rising series is a fellow by the name of Ian Lewis. And Ian is really amazing. He talked about risk abatement. Instead of worrying about who's going to sue me, he actually worked to get the British Parliament to pass a law that said, if you're a good Samaritan and you're trying your best to help someone and something negative happens, you cannot be sued. Mm. And it passed universally across all of the political group. They all signed off on that because that's one of the things that actually limits people and makes us hesitate to help when we need to be helping. Mm-hmm. And then he also got another law passed, and it had to do with the fact that if you say you're sorry, one of the biggest woundings we've found in the incarceration world is that if you do something that causes someone's death, or you do something and it causes harm, or you do something and it's a mistake, but the mistake had devastating consequences, that one of the first things people want to do if they harm someone is to say, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. But today, oftentimes you're told, do not talk to the other person. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say anything. Just ignore it. If you say anything, it can become, evidence in a trial or a lawsuit, or it's an insurance risk or a liability. There's all these things that we artificially put in the middle of people
Right.
And instead, the law that was passed was if you are, just because you say you're sorry, it cannot be used in a court of law as a legal admission of guilt. It's not that. And that too was passed universally by Parliament. And so at some point, I'm going to have Ian Lewis. I haven't talked to him. I just talked to him yesterday. And I'm going to see if he can come on one of the calls in the next few days to share what's happening. For example, England is going through a lot of upheaval right now because of the Queen's passing. But there's challenges like this, different kinds of challenges happening all over our world, and learning how to be safely compassionate. I mean, that sounds crazy, but how do you actually be humane? How do we do humane interactions when people are in trauma? Because when you're in trauma and you're reactive, if we're hyper reactive, sometimes you react and you hurt somebody and you don't even know it. I mean, I know a woman who was injured and she's in the hospital, and the doctor went to reset her shoulder. And when it was reset, she kicked somebody. So stupidly enough, in our county, somebody filed a felony charge for an assault. I mean, that's just not right. You know what I'm saying? She didn't intend to hurt anybody. She didn't even know she did. She found out later with the summons in the mail. I mean, that's not a good idea.
Right.
And so passing preventive and preemptive and common sense and decency protocols and building ethics groups so that we know how to conduct affairs and how to help each other, that's going to be part of the work, Mel, looking forward. What do we do into the future? These are some of the things that we need to do. And writing up new ethics, writing up new ways of measuring compassion, writing up, how do you help recover if you cause a problem in a community? How do you help make amends? What can you do that's healthy, that won't get you in legal trouble? Because we've got so much litigiousness in our particular culture. It's a serious problem.
Yeah.
So thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. There is one other website I'd like to share screen on. This was something that was launched just yesterday.
Awesome.
And we will be having the event that happened yesterday will be, once it was recorded. So once we get that all edited and everything, it will, I don't think it'll go on this website, but it will go on the sacompassion.net website. But what this is one of the collaboratives I'm involved in is called This Story Collaborative. We found that in any meeting we were in, regardless of where we were, someone always had a story. And it would be a good story. And then someone would say, are you writing that down? We ought to keep that somewhere. And so this collaborative said, okay, we're going to create a portal where we can collect those stories of largely the good stuff that's happening in San Antonio. So this is a template. If you wanted to create Story Portal Bellingham,
wow,
could very easily do that. But down towards the end here, these are a number of organizations that we partner with. Here's Grassroots Compassion San Antonio, which I'm involved in. That on there are the stories related to compassionate action in San Antonio. We have the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, the stories that, they're all links to all of these. So stories that you would hear from this is stories of interactions with people at either the bus station or the airport.
Mm-hmm.
We have a gentleman that wanted to get the stories out of what it's like to live in Black skin, particularly for men. And so he painted, I forget exactly how many men he looked at, but he painted their faces, and then there's a story associated with each of those portraits. And so you can go and do, and up to 30 here, 30
wow
portraits. And then we also, because we are at the intersection of two major highways, see a lot of trafficking, human trafficking through San Antonio. So this group, Ransomed Life, works with people who have been trafficked, and that has some stories. There's one here on the food bank. And we also have a Holocaust museum here in San Antonio. And so these are just some
Mary, where did you say this is located? I'm sorry. Is there?
It is, let me move my thing here so I make sure I get it right. It is storyportal.satx.org. And so this is, this project is kind of a three-part, mission, I guess you could call it. So the first part of the mission was to get the portal in cyberspace and then connect with organizations that already are collecting stories and get them linked into this website. The next phase, so to speak, will be collecting some stories. So we have an area here where people can submit stories in San Antonio. And you can see down here then that there's a submission sheet. And we will be working with organizations that maybe don't currently have a storyteller, but if we could connect them to like a work study student at the universities here, that work study student might be able to start amassing some of those stories and then link them into the portal. So it's kind of growing in mission as to what it's going to look like.
I think,
that's really.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think that's really creative. Actually, I think back to a lot of the civil rights era, some of the same kind of developments. We were trying to impact consciousness and using the stories and even more of, again, verbal stories often in church services through the network of churches, through the ecumenical interfaith community, beginning to have, so we began to build the overlap. You got everybody involved because everyone wants to tell their story. And then you have a way to begin to categorize this, to clump those so people could see that they had weight and they had some mass and that people weren't alone. And then you began to have people reflecting on the commonalities of what we call the overlap. Right? One of the challenges, I think, has been, how do we do this in this time? And kind of the irony of that is COVID, I think, has made people aware of the possibility of this way of sharing and more rapidly in our culture than it would have happened without it.
Yeah.
Necessity caused us to, our well-being and survival, caused us to think outside of what we knew as the boxes or the traditional ways. And so I'm looking at that within the religious community. A lot of the anti-racism, anti-oppression work that's been done in the religious communities. One of the things that I think is not there is a way of sharing that collectively again. I was one of the founders of Grassroots Ministries for creating anti-racism education and training institutions and training teams throughout the country. And now going into the corporate world and to cities doing some of the same kind of work. But it was about, you have to teach people how to even think in terms of a way of collaborativeness into the not yet.
Pick it up when you do it.
Don't know how to operate in the not yet normally. And so it's part of what this space might allow us to do. And I'm hearing you talk and others in terms of this group is trying to create the bridges to the not yet for people.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm really empowered by that. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, it's Ilona. I just thought, thank you so much, Karen. This has been really inspiring. I've traveled a lot across the world. I lived in various different countries. And one of the things that for me was a huge awakening or an awareness that came up is that we all just know our own stories, and we know our family stories, and we know our own pain. And I had very close friends in Manchester, England, who came out of Pakistan or basically North India. They were Sikhs. And we started one lunch break. We were just starting to talk about our family history, and both sides, the Sikhs and me, had no idea of the suffering on the other side. And one of the, once we recognize each other's suffering and we honor it, then we have a basis to start from on an equal footing. So that's one thing. And the other is I was in South Africa in 1996 while the Truth and Reconciliation talks were happening there. And I was so humbled by just to give a bit of background. So the idea was, after the end of apartheid, rather than doing a Nuremberg trial type of thing, which was about punishing the perpetrators, Bishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela came up with, it's important that we tell the truth, and people won't tell the truth if they're afraid of getting judged and getting sentenced. Right. And so the idea was to bring perpetrators and victims together. And I mean, it hasn't healed everything that's traumatic in South Africa, but at the time, it was such a powerful thing to face, for mothers who had lost husbands or sons, to face the policeman who had actually killed them. And you could see what happened between the two and what healing happened on both sides. And that is something that I thought that would never be possible in Europe, because we always have this, it's your fault or my fault kind of thing. And so I think there's so much that we can learn from other countries and other cultures in how to deal with these kinds of traumas.
I love that idea, Alona, because one of the biggest things that we've learned through the restorative justice and the restorative circle work that we've done and the research into it and the trainings that we've gone through is that people, one of the biggest things, if you don't get the chance to say you're sorry, I mean, people, that's one of the first things people have said to me in the beginning, I never got to say I'm sorry. And if you can't, that sadness just festers in there. And it's just, it's like one of the other big generational things I've discovered over the period of time, and especially this past year, as I've been looking at how do we heal the grief on the planet from so many different generations of humans that have caused so much harm. And yet we don't talk about it. We can't confess it because we don't want to go to jail or be punished for it. On the other hand, many times we cause harm as we're being told that that's our duty, that's our work, that's our job, that's our creed, that's our hero story. And so oftentimes people are given heroism stories. And yet when they were at war and they were in some of these places, they had to do enormously horrible things. And that unsolved, unmitigated, unexpressed sadness isn't able to go out. Now, a lot of people don't want to talk about that either because they don't want to go into sadness. It appears to be negative or it appears to be bad. That's one of the big problems that we've had with the Restorative Community Coalition. For most of our existence, people were terrified to even associate with us. Like in the beginning, they didn't want to be associated, even if some people would donate some to us and they don't, it needs to be anonymous, or they would volunteer with us, but nobody could know they did it because they would get in trouble or they, whatever. There's so much negative story around the idea that if you're working with people who have a criminal history, then you're going to be condemned because you are judged by the company you keep. And so the irony of this is that the very thing that is our solution is actually our Achilles heel. It's actually, and it's our solution, it's our Achilles heel, it's also our vulnerable place. So in the next couple of sessions, we're going to be talking about this, and we're going to talk about, diagnosing and unhooking to silence. And we don't even realize when we're being silenced because it's part of the custom, it's part of the behavior. You're supposed to be silent or not speak or whatever. We have to break these barriers because we really have no choice at this point. Compassionate communications, compassionate living, compassionate teamwork, building bridges across these silos so that we can learn to have these not tough conversations, that we can have these humane conversations, because in the humaneness, we can forgive ourselves, forgive others, and be better human beings. And that is what's required, especially going into this 2022 season where we're going to have a lot, we've got fires, we've got floods, we've got disasters. Those are the physical ones. But we have a lot of disaster to make up for over the last couple of years, as so many of our youth and our middle schoolers and high school kids, they were all kept out of school. They weren't able to mature even properly. Now, there's, of course, side benefits that came, but we just have to have these adult conversations. So, Karen, I'm aware that it's 12:48 already my time, if I'm looking at the correct clock.
Yep.
2:48, sorry. And we have another episode starting at 3:00. Do you have more that you want to share now, or do you want to open it up for more comments and maybe take a break in another 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
Well, I'm going to have to leave the call altogether in 10 minutes.
Okay.
But I've shared pretty much the main points that I had in my outline. If there's any questions that, are still unresolved by anybody, I'd be happy to answer those.
I also want to note before you go that you'll have an opportunity to hit all of those on the call. We'll have another opportunity to hear from Karen. She's going to be talking and introducing at another point some of the tiny home villages or compassionate villages type work that's going on in the San Antonio area when Doug Gustafson comes on Thursday at 1:00. The Intentional Living Tiny Home Villages Reinculturation segment will be coming in. And so if we have more leads, we can just intersperse them on these conversations. But anybody else want to say anything about what Karen brought up? Raise your hand or unmute. Okay, we'll let it sit. I just want to say thank you so much, Karen. I deeply appreciate what you brought forward. I'm sorry that our video connection wasn't as, it's very difficult. I've tried to do presentations when I had no apparent, not a huge number in the audience. And it's very difficult to talk to a blank screen. So I was not blank. I was present this entire time. I just want you to know that this is being recorded. Other people who are listening, this is being recorded. We've got a 3:00 episode that will line up here pretty quick, Growing Resilience. And we're asking people who have lived experience in the street to come share some of their stories, some of the things that they've learned having been in any of these situations. And you can, we'll be hopefully hearing from others who have, and you don't have to be obvious about who you are if it's a difficult situation, but we want people with lived experience to speak. So thank you very much, Karen. Thank you for joining us on the call.
All right, thank you for this opportunity. I always love partnering with you, Joy. Hi, and Alona and Pasha.
Thank you so much. So we'll see people back on the call at 3:00. Take a little break and we'll be back.